I will just note, everybody on the commission is here in person. Thank you for joining us. The first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of October 5th and 14th, 2021 meetings. I would entertain a motion. I have a motion by Jean, and I have a second by Herbst. It looks like Mr. Robinson has some comments.
Well, we can't have minutes for a meeting that hasn't started. And so we either started when we started, or we started when the WebEx meeting started. And if we started with the WebEx meeting, which I think is when the official meeting started, all the material before the WebEx technical issues meeting call to order needs to be deleted from the minutes because it wasn't part of an official meeting. So I would request that that change be reflected to only those items that occurred at the official meeting be reflected in the minutes, because you can't have minutes.
Okay. I think that works as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if we need an amendment, or if it's house cleaning.
Oh, if you want to treat it that way, I'm okay with that.
But
Otherwise,
maybe the substance being what it is, maybe it should be entertained as an amendment to the minutes. So I'm going to assume you're offering an amendment, yes? And a second.
Question, are we talking about the minutes of the 5th or the 14th?
14th,
14th.
Are we going to approve the minutes of the 5th? Because those haven't been approved either.
they're both, the motions for both.
right.
So I would maybe entertain a second for the amendment before we discuss more. A second by Jean. Okay, now we can discuss. Mr. Jean.
Well, would it make more sense for us try to, unless the commission is comfortable, would it make more sense to just amend and bring it back at the next meeting for ratification?
That could be an option.
Because I don't think it's paramount that we do it today.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have an amendment, but I would, if that's the will of the body, I mean, yes, Mr.
Well, I
Jean.
certainly concur that what John has raised is correct.
Okay,
And it would, so we don't make another mistake, why don't we just, I suggest, unless the commission differs with it, that it come
Okay.
back as administrative fix and bring
sure.
it back at the
Okay,
next
so we
meeting.
have a motion to refer back, and we'll bring it back at the next meeting. Yes, Mr. Robinson?
Perhaps the motion should be to approve the 5th minutes and not the
Okay.
14th. And then you can just bring the 14th back at the next meeting.
Okay, so if everybody who has made a motion and seconded a motion is okay with approving the minutes of October 5th and then bringing the minutes of the 14th back at the next meeting, does that look good to everybody else? I'm seeing nodding. Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the October 5th meeting and bringing the 14th meeting back after some cleanup can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we did it. Next up, we have our director's report. I'm going to flip it over to Eric. Comments?
Yeah, I think staff will entertain any questions or inquiries that you have about the report, anything in it.
I'm not seeing anybody. Oh, Mr. Robinson.
I had a couple of questions relative to the financials that were in there. Was the only increase, when were our increases in rates?
The last increase was in July 1.
But
with
did we
the
have
sewer.
one in last year that went into effect?
Yeah, I don't know the exact date. I think there were 3 different sewer rate increases, and then water was 2 separate increases.
So I noticed that some of the accounts receivables were increasing. Is that a phenomena of the increased rates, or do we have more parties that are in arrears with the amount of receivables?
I would say it's mainly, Val, I think when we talked, it was mainly just with the rate increases. Typically, anybody that's in the rears gets put on the tax roll, and we get that at the end of the year, so, but.
Valerie can help us with some of the financials here.
Noted on the bottom of the charts is when the last rate increases were effective. So for the water, there were 2 increases. one in July of 2020, one in January of 2021. For sewer, there were 2 increases. There was one in October of 2020, and the most recent one in July of 2021. And the arrearage amount increase is mostly due to these rate increases. We're not seeing additional numbers of accounts.
Mr. Force?
Eric, on the mention of Renew out of Madison will be the group who will be presenting at the next solar PIM. Do we know what they're promoting or what they're presenting? And what the relationship is between what we as a water utility will be presenting to the public and what they will be presenting?
Yeah, they're basically doing a broad education on what solar, the advantages, where they've been what other areas in Wisconsin have been moving this direction. What are some additional advantages for the utility to look at for doing solar on its own? And I think, one of the questions that came up at the last PIM was, to have an independent party come in and talk about solar on an education standpoint as well as a nationwide and Wisconsin-wide viewpoint. So they're a nonprofit. They don't, they just are into renewable energies, and this is one aspect that they go around and educate people on it. So
they will not be commenting on our project per se?
no, their presentation will be more broad than that. Clark Dietz will be presenting specifically on our project. Yeah.
Then I had a question on the LSL replacements. We have 54,000 and change remaining in the fund, but it doesn't look from what you say here like we're going to be able to spend that money. Is that true? Is that going to carry over, or is it lost?
It's already gone, Jim. We're over about 35,000 already. We had a lot of, I don't know what inspired the increases, but we've had a lot of approvals that were given out in April and May that we had actually lost hope for, and a lot of those are coming in now. We did talk with the DNR today, and they're going to give us some funding ahead of other municipalities or ahead of the rating schedule next year.
So what we have here is really not up to date?
Correct. Yeah, that's just happened in the last week. Yeah. So actually, we're going to spend more than what the DNR has provided us, but on the next funding cycle, they will give us priority for those funds to make sure that we get put whole.
Okay, so we had 76, and how many more, Scott, were approved?
I don't know the exact number, Jim.
Round numbers, 20, 30?
I'm going to say 11, probably over that. Plus, we have 3 to 5 more that are requesting approval yet this year.
Okay.
Mr. Jean?
I received an email, and there was a chain talking about some of the conditions or understanding that these folks had. Can we talk about that, or here under the director's report, or can't we talk about it? Because I don't think that was all 100% factual information.
From the email that you're
Yes.
talking about?
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know that we're agendized to talk about
Okay.
the lead service, but maybe that's something we can put on the agenda.
Well, if we need to, but I just didn't think everything was totally accurate with it, that's all.
Yeah, I think there's opportunity for us to clarify the program and what we're expecting and what we're doing. And you're talking about the ordinance development? Yes, okay. Just want to make sure I'm clear. I got that same email.
I also received a phone call and an email from a private citizen who also copied Eric. And I just today received a call from one of our alderpersons on the issue. So it's apparent to me that there's quite a bit of concern and discussion and questions about the ordinance.
Yes. I think we definitely have an opportunity to explain, maybe hold a public hearing, but maybe we shouldn't talk about it more here, and I'm continuing to, so. Any other comments on, or questions about what's on the report, or otherwise we will place it on file and continue on? Okay. All right, we are moving on to item number 3, discussion and possible action requesting approval of sole source purchase of Clarion 415 for year 2022. Maybe you could give us a little brief on what this is and why it's coming forward.
These are just our annual chemical purchases for the Clarion 415. The next item will be the 700. Those are both proprietary chemicals that were developed for our plant. They're used for the removal of iron, manganese from our system. So.
Mr. Robinson?
So we have, it appears that there's a city has a policy for procurement of sole sourced items between the department head and the finance director. Are these falling within this? And if they are, why are they before us? It's more of an operational issue than a policy issue?
Past practice has been that the utility goes through the utility commission instead of going through in front of the finance director, because the commission controls the funding for the utility.
These haven't, our procurement policy, does have provisions in it for, exclusions, like, buying power from WPS and things like that. These were not put in that procurement policy, so they need to go through the sole source purchase requirement, which would require us to come through the commission because of the dollar value for them.
So again, let me ask the question. This is an operational item versus a policy item. Why does the commission need to be involved if it's budgeted?
We could bring it to Board of Public Works as well if you'd rather do that, John, but it's got to go to somewhere. If it's not in the procurement policy, I need approval through a sole source purchase.
Well, can we establish that policy for this commission, similar to what the city does if we're operating outside the city's policy? Because these are operational issues and we've approved them relative to the budget, and the city has a policy that it deals with it for all other activities. Why are we, past practice aside, why are we engaging in operational issues at a policy-making board level?
We need approvals through the sole source purchase, so I guess, we could put it in the procurement policy and run it through council and everything as an exemption. That's fine. I don't have an issue. It's just we haven't done that in the procurement policy to exclude these chemicals. So.
I would move we accept the sole
Oh,
source.
your mic isn't on, and I'm seeing exasperation from,
I'm sorry. I was going to move we accept the sole source purchase proposals.
so I don't know that maybe we can talk about the first one. So.
You want to do them separately?
They're agendized separately, so it kind of feels like
Yeah,
we
they
should, but,
They are.
okay, so we have a motion on the Clarion 415 for 2022. Do I have a second? I have a second by Jean. Looks like you had some comments.
I concur with John. I never understood this. I think if it isn't the end of the world, I think we should request that they should be exempted, especially with the new chemicals coming forward, okay?
Okay, so we have a motion to approve this, and also a request to maybe follow up with legal and finance to see what we can do to get this in as part of the exemption.
Do.
Okay, thank you. All right, so all of those in favor of approving the sole source purchase for Clarion 415 for year 2022 can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I guess following up on that, item number.
I'll move approval of the sole source purchase of the 700.
Okay, so Force has approved, or moved to approve the sole source purchase of Clarion 700 for year 2022. Do I have a second? I have a second by Herbst. Any discussion? Okay, all of those in favor of approving the sole source purchase for Clarion 700 can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And finally, item number 5, discussion and possible action requesting approval of the sole source purchase for Aqua Ammonia for year 2022. I would entertain a motion. I have a motion by Herbst, and I have a second by Jean. Any discussion here? Okay, all of those in favor of approving the sole source purchase of Aqua Ammonia for 2022 can signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Nope. Okay, we're on to item number 6, discussion and possible action requesting approval for a purchasing agreement extension for liquid carbon dioxide for 2022. Maybe a brief on this by anybody?
Sure, I can. We have a extension clause in our contract from last year's quotes that we received. This would be a 3.7% increase for next year, which is, the increase included would still be 33% lower than the second place quote we got last year. So what we're seeing in the market is anywhere from 5 to 35% increases. I think we would be better off taking the extension at the 3.7.
Okay. Anyone, I have a motion, I'm assuming by Mr. Jean, to approve the purchase agreement extension. Do I have a second? Second by Herbst. Any questions or discussion? Okay, all of those in favor of approving the purchasing agreement extension for liquid carbon dioxide for 2022 can signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, next up, item 7 is our presentation on solar options for the drinking water treatment facility. Pass it over to whoever's doing this. All right, looks like our folks started here. Sorry. You're not followable. Nobody's on the winner, so I don't think
Just let us know when you're ready to roll.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Yeah, so Clark Dietz is going to give a presentation on the solar, on where we're at, along with some different options that have been put together. So just let me know when you want the slides to move forward.
Got it. Well, thank you, guys. I also have Chris Collins here from Sunvest, and he's going to help with the presentation as well. And Sunvest has been our partner on this and helping develop some of the layouts and cost estimates. And Chris can give you a little more background later when he's up. So we've been working with staff over the last number of months, and coming here over the last months as well. We've been charged with finding some more information for you and then following up after the public information meeting. So today, we're gonna go over some of the overview and benefits of solar. Chris is gonna handle that, and then we're gonna kind of take a stroll down memory lane and see where we've been and some of the background on this project from the beginning. Then we'll move into the sizes of the array and basis of design and how those were developed, funding scenarios, and then the last part of this will be to talk about what your priorities are and what the next steps are. Next. So the benefits and overview portion is something Chris is going to handle. We'll move into that next.
Thanks a lot for having me. My name is Chris Collins. I'm a project developer with Sunvest Solar. I've been in the solar industry for 16 years. We're based in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. I work out of an office in Madison, Wisconsin. I wanted to just answer quickly. Somebody asked about Renew Wisconsin and their role, and Renew has their importance has grown significantly in the last few years. They're sort of a lobbying effort for the solar industry in Wisconsin. They provide not only incentives but education for people about sustainability and renewable energy. So they've been a good partner to the industry in the state. So let me skip ahead. I think yeah. So just some basic education here. Solar panels are constructed of 2 layers of silicon. They have an imbalance of electrons in one of the layers. So when photons from the sun hit the lower layer of the solar panel, it releases an extra electron, and that happens throughout the solar panel. So it is collects photons, and it's DC current that the panels produce. There is no moving parts or anything like that. It's all solid state. And the size of the panel is really what determines how many watts you're going to be able to collect from the sun. I've been, like I said, doing this for 16 years. When I started, the panels we were using were 156 watts, and they were a little bit smaller. Now we're looking at panels moving into next year that could be 475 or 550 watts. So not only have they gotten more efficient, but the footprint of the panels is getting larger. So the technology has evolved, and it's gotten better. Obviously, solar being a renewable energy source, doesn't use any fossil fuels. You know, I've heard sometimes people say, oh, the panels leach dangerous chemicals into the ground. That isn't true. They're all sealed with tempered glass and a backsheet on them, and all the panels carry a warranty from the manufacturer to produce 80% of their rated output at 25 years. So 25-year warranty is an industry standard warranty for solar panels. This is the basic design behind one. You can see on the far right there, that is a solar cell. It's silicon, made from silica, which is one of the most plentiful minerals on the planet. You take a collection of solar cells, you build them into a solar module or a solar panel, and then you take a number of solar modules and build them into an array. And while it sounds simple, there is quite a bit of engineering that's involved as far as how many panels you can string together and how much voltage you're gathering. You have to be managing the amperage. And then all this DC current you're producing flows to what are called inverters that collects all the solar energy and changes it over to usable AC energy. So you can go to the next one. Just an idea of power. When we are looking at this system for the water filtration plant, one of the things we look at is, number one, how much energy it uses in the course of a month or the course of a year, and also how much energy it uses at a given time. So we call that given time thing a peak demand. So in other words, if everything is turned on, the peak demand may be around 250 kilowatts, kW. When you look at that peak demand over time, that's where you come up with kilowatt hours. So we're just trying to give a little illustration here of, you know, kilowatt hours and wattage. So, you know, a kilowatt hour is the equivalent of 10 100-watt light bulbs, which is 1,000 watts or a kilowatt, that are burning for 1 hour, kilowatt hour. So that kind of, again, a little more base knowledge for you. You can go to the next one. So again, when you're looking at the environmental benefits here, you know, what we're stripping away here is coal-fired electricity. You're offsetting the consumption of whatever facility you're feeding this into. And it's a self-generating system. So design life of a PV system is 30 years. You know, some people say 25 to 35. We use kind of a base outline of 30 years with that 25-year warranty. The panels, all the structures for the ground mount are steel and aluminum, so nothing will corrode or rust, and it's meant to be there for as long as the panels will produce power. You can go to the next one. Again, more positive benefits. You know, part of what has transpired in this discussion about the water filtration plant is part of what I do every day is to try to determine what your goals are. You know, are you trying to say, okay, we have a, you know, when I talk to people about this in a commercial setting, either I say you have this much space on your roof and you can fit this many panels, or I'll say this is how much energy you use every year, every month, every year, and we'll try to, you know, design a system that will offset that annual usage. And then we can look at the other part of it and say, okay, your peak demand is 300 kilowatts. We don't want to exceed that with the system size, because when we export energy back to the utility, you won't be earning the same credit that you're paying retail for that power. So, you know, that's one of the benefits here. Obviously, the bigger ones here are it's renewable, it's replenishable. I mean, you know, we joke that we only have 4 billion years of sunlight left, so we got to say it's going to run out at that time. But very low maintenance on these systems. There is maintenance. If you're talking about a PV system, a larger one, you should be thinking about an O&M plan, operations and maintenance. There are very robust monitoring systems for an array that can track what an individual inverter is doing, what an individual electrical string that feeding that inverter is doing. We have a full asset management team, and we have this brilliant young graduate from UW-Platteville, and every day he looks at our assets and gets alerts on where there might be issues, where things may be underproducing, where there may be preventative maintenance that we need to schedule and things like that. So monitoring is a big part of this. It is a commodity that has a return on investment. It's going to last, it's going to outlast how long it takes to pay for it. It's going to pay for itself over a given amount of time. So you can go to the next one. Here, just more facts. This is in your fact sheet. In 2020, for the first time ever, renewable energy, not just solar, but all renewable energy, turned out to be cheaper than coal generated energy. So that was a big threshold for the renewable energy industry. But the reason I'm in it, and the reason that a lot of people I work with is that it's clean energy. It's something that will last a long time. And the industry's growing. I was the 6th employee at Sunvest Solar, and we are now approaching 35 employees in 5 years. We've grown that much. So that's industry-wide. I mean, the industry's grown by about 35 or 40% every year. So I'm trying to think what else is up there that I could point out. But larger investments are happening all over the country. We're active in 13 states, and that is particularly because of incentives. There are power purchase agreements that are available in different states. It is not the case in Wisconsin, but Minnesota, Illinois, Maine, and some other states have a mechanism where we can find someone to finance a system. We can put it on someone's building and sell them power for less than what they're paying from the utility. We're hoping that there may be a legislative change in Wisconsin that will allow that to happen, but that hasn't occurred yet. I think you go to the next one. A basic idea behind solar is, the panels on the upper left, on a roof or on the ground. That's DC power that flows into that inverter. That inverter actually has a DC disconnect, so you could turn the system off at the inverter. All utilities require an AC disconnect that they can come and turn off the system. The inverters are also designed so that if grid power drops below a certain level, the inverter will turn off. There's a bunch of safeguards to make sure that no matter what happens, that there isn't solar generated energy feeding back onto the utility grid when the grid is down, because someone could get injured or hurt if that happened. And then in this case, this is kind of the case of We Energies. We install a second meter that measures solar production. And then you have your standard consumption meter that tells you what a facility is using. So, in Madison Gas and Electric, there's a single meter that is bidirectional. So in effect, the solar is slowing down what you're buying from the utility. In We Energies territory, they are taking care of all those credits and all that energy production in billing. WPS at this point, I believe, has bidirectional meters. They come and install that. But part of the process for developing and installing a system is filing an interconnection application with the utility, so they know exactly what's being installed, what the equipment is. We have to submit spec sheets. We have to do one-line diagrams. Certificates of insurance are required. It's not a terrible process. It's just one that has to happen so that the utilities know exactly what is being put onto their utility grid. So go ahead. Couple examples of ground mount systems. We do some work for the We Energies in town. So these are ground mounted systems. The left-hand side is at New Berlin School District. The right-hand side is for Washington County and West Bend. And so again, now we're talking about, okay, how much acreage is available and how much energy do you want to produce? These are fixed tilt systems, meaning we drive vertical pilings into the ground. They're GPS located. There's angled racking attached to those. Then the panels are attached to that racking. We space the rows out in those developments so that one row doesn't shade the row behind it. And then all of that electricity is gathered throughout the array and feeds to inverters that are either mounted within the row, or sometimes they may be a bank of inverters somewhere in the array, and then these would feed into a utility sited transformer for that array. You can go to the next one. This is one of the systems we did for We Energies. It's part of the Solar Now program. So it's a 2.83 megawatt system. This is about 9,000 panels on this site. And again, in the very middle, you can sort of see a gap right in the middle of the array. That's where all the inverters are, and that is where the utility transformer is. So in this case, UW Parkside is getting a lease payment for the property, and We Energies is harvesting all the electricity to offset some of their renewable portfolio standard. So another system, this is near a gas plant down in Illinois. And again, it was primarily dictated by how much acreage was available. So again, fixed tilt system. All these systems have a 6-foot chain link fence around them that's secure. You don't really want people in these solar farms wandering around. There's quite a bit of very high voltage DC current in there. One of the things that is becoming real prevalent with solar is low growth pollinator plants within the array. Some people talk about putting livestock in there, but again, we get a lot of high voltage DC, so we're not quite there in our company, but this way there are pollinators in there, so it creates a bee habitat for that. You can go to the next one. So the solar assembly process, upper left are the GPS located driven piles that are driven in the ground. And before that can happen, there's a geotechnical study that happens on that property. There's also a pull test to make sure that the skin friction on those vertical pilings is enough to hold them in place. And that's all engineered. There's civil engineering that goes into the site. Wetland mitigation is considered. Considerable amount of permitting and site due diligence before this happens. Then the middle slide at the top is the angled racking that gets assembled. Upper right are the underground conduits that carry the conductors from the panels. Lower left is the transformer and the switchgear to collect all that electricity. And the middle on the bottom is are the inverters that collect the DC power and switch them over to AC. And then lower right is just an example of the prairie pollinators that have come in over time. So one thing that's really grown with the solar industry is the prairie pollinator business. So there's companies we work with that weren't doing nearly the volume that they are, and now they're serving the solar industry. So then on the bottom of the page, you see some of the warranties there. I mentioned the module warranty is 25 years. The racking is 25 years. Inverters are typically 10 to 12 years, and then there's a workmanship warranty for 5 years. I should add that in addition to the fixed tilt arrays, there are also what are called single axis tracking arrays. So those typically run north-south, and then there's our tracking motors that follow the sun from the east to the west during the day, and you get about 25 or 30% more production when you're tracking the sun in that way. You can go to the next one. Incentives in Wisconsin. Focus on Energy has been a pretty big incentive engine for a long time. They, a few years ago, invented a more solidified quadrennial plan, so we'd have a little more basis to know moving forward what incentives were going to be available. Net metering is just the idea of getting retail credit for the power you push back to the utility, and the policy of net metering varies from utility to utility. For example, Madison Gas and Electric in Madison they have a 100 kilowatt AC net metering policy. And they do an annual true-up, so every year they evaluate how much solar energy you've produced, how much energy you've used, and they balance it out. We Energies has a 300 kilowatt net metering policy that they do on a monthly true-up, and then it varies from utility to utility in that scope. Solar access rights, I haven't had too many issues with this, but I did have a gentleman who had solar on his house. Someone tore down the house next door, and he wanted to make sure they didn't build a big, tall solar structure that would block his solar access. And there are other incentives too. There's some Office of Energy Innovation for the Department of Administration has incentives for solar arrays. That window just opened. So some municipalities and school districts and other entities are applying for those. And incentives kind of come and go. There is a REAP financing, renewable energy, it's agricultural program, so farmers can apply for funding. And again, this is something that, this is Wisconsin, but there is different incentives for every state. For a privately held company or someone that owns a business, there are tax credits. There's a 26% federal tax credit for solar off the cost of the system. And you can also do year one accelerated depreciation. I know that doesn't apply here, but it's just another incentive that people use quite a bit, so.
Do you mind if I ask a quick question?
Not at all.
One of the comments that we got from neighbors was a question about if the array would reflect into their windows, and maybe the question is better served like later on in this, but I'm curious if you had a response to that kind of a question.
Yeah, so the way that the panels are designed is to refract the sunlight, not reflect it. You're trying to collect those photons and collect that light. I've installed 3 systems right next to Dane County Airport. You have to get FAA approval, and they do a study. We also did a system at Madison Technical College. It is right across the street from Truax Field. So reflectivity of solar panels is really not an issue. I did sold a system to someone years ago, and they had found some story on the internet where the light was blinding into the neighbor's house. I don't know, I probably sold 700 systems, and I have really never seen that to be an issue, so.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at Mr. Robbins. Do you have a question? Since I've started this.
Well, as long as you started it, going back to your earlier comments, you mentioned that the panels are becoming more efficient. In the context of the design of this specific project, if we've gone from 60 watts to 450, 500 watts, is there more capacity if we go with the more efficient panels, or were those anticipated to be designed into this array?
Well, we are going to use the most efficient, the highest wattage panels we can get at the time when we construct this.
And so what does that do to our earlier performance? Maybe we'll get at that later.
When we finally come up with what size system you're going to need, we've had multiple discussions about sizing the system. One was based on the peak demand of the plant, meaning, at its highest usage, what system would provide power that wouldn't push back to the utility. Another size was based on the acreage available at the Big B location. Mm-hmm. And then for this particular one, we gave one that was in between the two, just to give you a third option. So what would happen is when someone said, okay, let's go for a final design, we would base it on whatever panels are available at that time. For example, if we'd done this 2 years ago, we'd probably be using 340 watt panels. It's evolving relatively quickly, but did I answer that? I'm not sure. It would really depend on what's available at the time. So, but we would try to use the highest wattage panels that we can, because then you need less of them.
So there could possibly be an impact on the footprint of the array.
Absolutely, yeah.
Second question I had was, is there any noise associated with the inverter or the transformer?
The inverters have fans, but typically they're going to be out in a field that'll be 200 yards from anybody, so you're not going to hear those. Inverters are, or I'm sorry, transformers are, they hum, you know, like most transformers, but it isn't any different than a typical utility transformer you have in your yard or next to a manufacturing facility.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Incentives, I think we can go to the next one. So this was one of the exercises that we've done based on some of the interval data that we looked at with the facility. This isn't exactly what we did for this project, but I wanted to show this because if we get 15-minute kilowatt interval data, peak demand data from the utility, we can also take the interval data that we're expected to produce from the array and show where the offset is going to be. For example, on the far left, that's, you know, we're overproducing there, so that curve that dips below the line, that's when you're pushing power back to the utility. That's when we talk about the peak demand of that facility and the AC production of the system. And, you know, whether or not we want to look at this over time, kilowatt hours over months and a year, or if we want to look at it in real time, because we have to work out that financial equation. If we're sending 40% of the power out to the utility and you're only getting 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour for it, then the economics may not be favorable. But I just kind of want to show that tools are there to sort of demonstrate how you can show what the facility uses at peak demand and what the array will produce. And again, we're talking about a system that has a 30-year design life, so this curve isn't going to be exactly the same every week, every month, you know, every year. So go ahead. This is what I mentioned about monitoring. So on the left, that's one of our inverter manufacturers called Solar Edge, and that is a given month, and it shows how many kilowatt hours are produced each day of that month. On the right is another example of the Solar Edge showing production for 7 days, so a weekly production. And there can be weather reports built into this. There can also be consumption monitoring for a facility built into this, so you can show what a facility is using at a given time and what the solar is producing at that given time, and see the correlation between solar production and consumption at that facility. So more about the monitoring, and just kind of, you know, that this is establishing again that this is renewable energy. This is obviously in the middle of the month, so there hasn't been any production past that 15th day of the month. But there are a lot of times for the larger utility scale projects that we use, we'll use a more robust monitoring system that has a pyranometer, meaning it measures sunlight. It's looking at weather. So then you have a correlation between how much sunlight is actually hitting the array and how much the array is producing. And that goes back to our asset management team that can look at that and go, okay, here's how much this should be producing, here's how much it is. Maybe there's an issue with the array, we should get out there and have somebody look at it, or check the monitoring and see if we have any alerts that there may be, you know, an issue with the array. So when I started doing this, up until about, I would say, up until about 9 or 10 years ago, the monitoring was really nothing. I mean, you'd go up and knock on the inverter and you'd get a number of what it produced, you know, over time, and you'd write it down. But now it's much more robust, which helps with predictability and with accountability. So, so the generation here at the top, this, I pulled this off of one example. This doesn't relate, that kilowatt hours doesn't relate to anything we're providing, but you know, we can show some metrics here for, you know, the average homes energy usage that we're going to offset, miles not driven by cars, you know, CO2 emissions, we can show offset for that. So this kind of goes back to, you know, what are your goals for this system? Is it purely financial? Do you have energy generation goals that you want to meet? Are there environmental goals that you want to meet? You know, we have some companies that we talk to that have, you know, a certain return on investment period that they have to meet, or they won't even consider it. We have other companies that say, hey, you know, we produce products that, you know, that you know, a lot of, they want to offset the carbon footprint of that product. So then to them, maybe the return on investment doesn't need to be as quick. And they can say, hey, even though, we're using power, we're also saving a bunch of energy with solar. Again, it really depends on your goals for the system, so. Any other questions I can answer? Yeah.
You demonstrated the production from day to day. I trust that was dependent on cloud cover. But how is it defined? How would you characterize it between seasons, like from winter to summer?
Oh, so obviously in the summer months, May, June, July, August, the power is going to be much greater during those times. In your shoulder months, at spring, fall, winter, it's going to drop off. So there's a power curve. We typically start it in January where it doesn't produce very much, or February, and it goes up as the year goes on. And then when you get back to the end of the year, the power curve drops off again. So I've had conversations with people who have geothermal systems, and unfortunately, it's kind of an inverted curve. They use more power in the summer months. I'm sorry, they use more power in the winter months for heating with geothermal and less in the summer, so it's an inverse curve. But solar is typically a bell curve with the higher part of production in the warmer, longer summer months.
Any other questions? Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Well, Chris isn't going anywhere, so I mean, right now, no. If you have other questions, so if you can go to the next one. So I just wanted to kind of go back to where we started and kind of recap what we've gone through and how we ended up where we are today. So during the RFP request, that's language from the RFP, and that's the exhibit when this project first started. And we were looking at a 40, 60, or 90% offset of the annual electrical consumption of the new plant. So if you recall hearing the number 3 million kilowatt hours, that's what that number is. So if you want to go to the next one. So that was our basis of design in the concept phase, and how we looked at where would we put this project, what size does this need to be. Chris was involved and Sunvest in the onset of this and helping us size it on the PV side of things. So we were looking at a suitable piece of land, 6 to 15 acres, to hit that 40, 60, and 90% offset of 3 million kilowatt hours. So we first took a look at the areas north of the plant per the RFP. And you may recall back in the April and June meetings, there were some subsurface situations there, debris that made that property not feasible. The drinking water treatment plant stormwater basin was relocated a little bit to the north, which kind of encroached into some of the original locations, and that had to do with some subsurface conditions on that project. And then there was an aggregate stockpile that has since grown there. That's about, 15 to 20 years worth of the city's aggregate. That's not feasible to move as well. There are some other steep topography issues, and then the distance as we looked further north from the plant started to get a little greater. The further away this is from the drinking water plant and the facility that's going to use the electricity, the more costly it is to run infrastructure back. The next one. So then as we went through conceptual planning, 1010 Bugby became available. So we talked with staff about that and looked at the size of the property, did some desktop due diligence, worked with the city on doing test pit excavations. That property appeared to still be a fill site. However, the majority of the fill in 8 test pit excavations looked relatively clean. There was a little bit of debris, maybe some asphalt, but not a significant amount of debris. And then the city in their purchase had someone put together a phase 1 ESA, and nothing came back hot on that or needing additional investigation. So since there weren't any major items of concern, we looked at what would a concept solar array look like on that piece of property. The property itself is 7 acres, located almost all within the city limits. There's a small piece to the north that's in the town of Maine. It's adjacent to the drinking water treatment facility, and the topography is much more gentle there. I'll go to the next one. So the project fit the parameters of the original RFP. So we dug in a little bit deeper on, can it fit an array that would meet a 90% offset of the annual consumption of 3 million? So if you look on the left picture there, that would be the size of the array you would need. And we talked about that in April of 2021, that the property couldn't support an array that big. On the right-hand side, that's maximizing the land area, putting in some setbacks, leaving some room for a fence, staying away from the pond to the north. On the northwest side of that array, there's some windrowing of material, and the stormwater basin is off to the west of that. So that's the maximum footprint that could fit on that piece of property, with a system size of 1.26 megawatts, and then the production just under 1.8 kilowatt hours. Go to the next one. So this is just a little bit of a zoomed-in view of that, and this is the project that you've seen kind of moving forward since June. Next one. So after taking a closer look at that, as I noted, the site looked feasible to move forward into doing some planning and preliminary design, because in concept, it seemed like a suitable site. So we went back, worked with Sunvest a little bit more on some other scenarios, and at this is the time that we looked more at, rather than the annual consumption of the plant, we looked at how the electricity is used and when it's used. This was the layout that you may recognize from the public information meeting as well, to get feedback from the public. If you want to kind of go to the next one. Next. So here's, as I noted, where we had gotten the load profile from WPS and looked at sizing that against the production of the array. When we did that, we looked at a 24-hour period, and what was a little bit unexpected is the electricity is used fairly equally throughout 24 hours. There was some expectation, because the plant is staffed and most of the work, so to speak, gets done in the first shift, that there would be a bigger need during first shift. Now, we talked previously about being able to adjust the operations of the plant to make that be the case. Right now, it's not, and none of this includes optimizing operations to optimize use of electricity during the day. That would need to take place after the plant is built, and you start to look at how it's put together operationally and what you can do to capitalize on those opportunities. You have questions on that? It looks like maybe there's.
Go ahead.
So you can't design in operational efficiencies when you're doing the original design?
We didn't do the original design of the treatment plant. So I don't know, Scott, if you can weigh in on how it works from an operational perspective on some of the bigger draws.
Most of our bigger draws right now are older motors for our pumps. So right now, under current operation, we fill at night. Typically, pumps run most of the day just to keep up with demand, and then we fill our reserves at night. The next morning, the reserves go down, pumps start. So like Tanya said, we don't have a large influx or deflux in our operation. Everything's just kind of set up to run smoothly across the whole day. Our plant right now does not tolerate large jumps in water production, so we like to even that out. So we don't know what the new plant will tolerate yet.
So you're talking about the old plant, Scott,
Correct.
and you're not sure what the new plant would need?
No, we should have more variables, and we should have more, we shouldn't have to have exactly the whole even thing spread out across the whole day, but most plants run better when they continue to run. So I think a better plan for us is to plan for even all the way across, and if we are able to adjust for some efficiencies later, that would be a bonus.
and to collect these, what's the impact on power, on a solar power array if the demand is constant across all 24 hours? Is that good? Is that bad? Does it matter?
And matter in terms of
Well,
performance?
you were
or-
asking about the operations of the plant and its energy draw.
Right.
And Scott has just said the energy draw on the existing plant is pretty constant across 24 hours, and he estimates that the new plant will be the same. Does that have any impact on the solar arrangements that you're proposing?
It would. So what we would look at is so the solar array can only produce power when it's producing power with the sun. There's no storage in any of these scenarios.
Okay.
So yes, it would. If we run somewhat consistent like the plant does now, the array would be smaller if you were going to use everything produced and not have sell back to the utility at your plant. So we have 3 scenarios. One is to have little or no sell back, and that assumes that there's a consistent load profile across 24 hours. So we extrapolated what's happening at the plant now to the new plant.
Okay.
And we've grown it with the same ratio. And then there's a middle size that has some initial sellback now because you're not using as much now as you would in 30 years. So that's the 498 kilowatt size. And then the 1.2 megawatt size is the one that you've been seeing all along. And that would have some sellback now as well as long-term. So all of these would be kind of maybe the minimum size sort of in their category because there's no process optimization happening. It's all just scaled from the existing plant load profile.
So outside of the pump capacity, if we were to upgrade pumps and go with more pumping when the solar array was generating more power, would that affect the pro forma and our utility bill in the long term? Because, if we have even use of electricity, we don't have even production of kilowatts through our solar array because you're generating that during the day. And if we're using it 24, unless you have the storage. So would it be advantageous for us to evaluate the pumps in the wells in order to look at potential savings in cost? Because if we use NatureWise and we pay a premium for that nighttime electrical use, our costs go up for that energy to maintain that 24-hour and current pumping rate. And there may be some advantages to the utility to look at whether or not the status quo is advantageous to us from a bottom line perspective. It doesn't get into the operational issues of, I know it's better if it flows, but there's also some cost associated with, potential costs associated with that, given the differential in the utility cost or the kilowatt cost.
Yeah, I think the optimization of the plant is something, once we get it started up. I mean, from all of those processes that we're doing to treat the water and to fill our finished water tanks and things like that. Like, do we fill those? When do we fill them? All of that optimization, will happen through SCADA and through our controls. But as Scott said, we don't know. We think it will be more tolerable than our existing plant, to do more water at one time to finish it, to possibly fill tanks or send water out to the distribution system at certain times. But we're not quite sure how tolerable at this point, until we get operations in. So I agree.
Oh, sorry. You're correct, and the more you can use while the array's producing power, the more long-term opportunity you have to save money on your electrical costs. Correct?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that we did discuss that with Donahue, who designed the process for the new plant. And like Eric said, if you're gonna have all the capabilities to do that, it's gonna be just, getting to that point, getting your process as efficient as you can to work with the solar.
Okay.
The next couple slides are really just how the three different sizes of array lay out. So this would be the smallest array. Again, that wouldn't be the location. This is all just relative to the size of the piece of property available. And then I just want to note, each of these costs you'll see on these next three slides are just the cost of the array. They don't include engineering, legal, land, O&M, or any of the inverter reserve. But all of those things are included in the cost analysis toward the end of the presentation here. So this is the one that would capture your base, or produce your baseline amount of electricity. And this would be the smallest array proposed.
But
Next.
Tanya, you're saying that that is not the layout. You've just put rows of, put arrays in there to fill out the 226. So they could be,
Right.
they could be backed up. It could be more of a horizontal than a vertical layout.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Correct. The next one is the 498 kilowatt, and you can see how that one lays on the site. It takes about half the property and about twice the amount of cost for this one, kind of the same caveats. One other caveat here, and you'll see it at the bottom of the slide, is pricing right now. We have a little bit of elevated costs in here, and this is another thing that we've worked with Sunvest on. So they're on top of commodity pricing by the 8 hours, 24 hours, 48-hour period. So right now, it's pretty volatile. So these are elevated a little bit in terms of if you were to build this today. Plus, there's some contingency in there because we're still in the preliminary planning stage. We haven't sort of nailed down what the project's going to look like yet. So we wanted to make sure these are a little bit conservative. So the next one, and this is one you've seen before. This is using all of the space on that piece of property. We're about twice the cost here as the last one. Again, same caveats here. This one has a significant amount of sellback if you were to put an array in of this size. However, none of these take into account the public information feedback and addressing those. So as Chris noted, in terms of what are the goals of this project, those are all really important things to talk about, and we'll get to that at the end. Next one. So here we are to talk about cost, the fun part, right? So all of these projects, regardless of how you fund them, are the same cost and per each size. So I think when we talked last time, we were trying to talk about each of these things and each way to fund the projects, but the funding opportunities aren't really comparing apples to apples. So there's the WPS-owned program, which is under NatureWise, and that's a completely different scenario than the city owning their own array. Chris mentioned that in many other of our neighboring states, you can have third-party ownership of arrays, and that's not allowed here. So obviously, we're not looking at that one, but we wanted to make you aware that it's not something you can do today. Yep, absolutely.
And I would say that could change. A bill was introduced to the state legislature to allow third-party financing for systems. Nobody knows what's going to happen. A lot of people aren't optimistic, so other people are, but there is a chance that could change, so.
So firms like Johnson Control are looking at this, and how do they fit into that, where they're doing leasebacks?
I can't speak to Johnson.
They were at a Wisconsin Counties Association meeting and talking about that as a possibility. So are they just on the cutting edge and not aware of the regulatory environment, or are there other options that may be available?
So Johnson Controls has an array at their facility, or?
They're looking at marketing to governments and others, and I don't know, I know enough to be dangerous, but they raised it as an option.
So there are ESCOs in the state, energy service companies, Johnson Controls, Trane Technologies, Honeywell, and, in those cases, the state is putting out an RFP for solar at certain places. There was one for UW Parkside, separate from the one that we did. I wouldn't say that that's categorized the same way as this. This is a straight sort of design build for this different facility. So I don't know if I can speak to that structure that you're talking about. It does happen, but those are typically state mandated projects.
Well, or mandated for state facilities.
State facilities, yes.
So if state facilities can do it, is there an option for locals to do it?
I don't know. I can't answer that, sorry. I haven't worked on community solar for towns in Wisconsin.
Well, but, if they're doing it, for instance, for UW Parkside or UW Platteville, taking that concept, could we do that for the water commission, for the drinking water facility?
I wouldn't know how to
I
answer
just
that,
would,
yeah.
if it's an option, maybe if we could look at it, I think it would be beneficial if somebody else would, if there are other players in the game.
I don't have an answer for you, sorry.
We can get one for you, John.
Yeah.
We'll look into it.
Other questions?
You want me to go back?
Just one thing to note, in the cost scenarios, we'll be looking at, we're looking at borrowing and then a supplemental grant. So here's a list of the assumptions that we've made in terms of the cost analysis. As I noted, the numbers you'll see now are kind of all in: land, engineering, legal, construction, contingency. What you don't see up there is O&M and an inverter reserve. Borrowing terms are 10 years, 2.5%. All of the grant scenarios assume a $1 million grant. If the project is smaller than $1 million, there's not a negative amount included in the scenario. The city isn't eligible for tax credits, so if you look at how solar is being put together for private business, you'll hear a lot about tax credits, and Chris mentioned that 26% tax credit. And that's where having a third-party ownership starts to benefit those people. They can capture the tax credits where you as a municipality cannot. We put a 2% escalation on the various variables that you see there. One thing that's a little bit different in this information than the last time we were here was we did increase the sellback rate after 5 years for the scenarios that had sellback. And that's because in 5 years from now, we think, as Chris noted, because there's legislation being brought up now, that you'll have an opportunity for an increase in sellback. We were somewhat conservative on that. It's not, it doesn't make or break the project, but it makes it look much more appealing in the long term. Your capital investment, as you see on the next couple slides, will show that that's probably the biggest thing that you'll have to talk about making a decision on. The last thing is we use the same load profile across all the scenarios, and again, we didn't look at future operational adjustments on that. It's just a straight extrapolation. Okay, so next one. So engineers like charts and graphs, right? So here's the Mac Daddy chart graph. So if you want to skip to the next slide, we'll kind of go back and forth between the two. So here's kind of a summary of that graph. Do you want to talk about this one, or do you want me to? Okay.
Okay, so across the top there, you have the three sizes and our sizing criteria, which you've heard of. The next line there is the total capital cost, and as Tanya mentioned, that includes everything. That's construction cost, design, engineering, legal, the whole works. The next line is your annual capital cost. The first part is year 1, and then you'll see it goes to 0 at year 11 because we're assuming a 10-year payback on that. The next line then is your annual savings. So this is going to be the amount that you're saving on your energy bill, because you now have renewable, minus your O&M and your inverter reserve. So that's what you're going to save in year 1 and then in year 11. The next line there is the year at which you start realizing savings. So in those first scenarios across the top where we're not looking at grant money, you're going to realize savings in year 11 when that capital cost drops off. And then the ROI there is quite a ways out. The next scenarios at the bottom are with the $1 million grant. And it's the same information, and you'll notice you start realizing savings earlier, especially in the first scenarios because your capital cost is less. And then your ROI looks a lot better. And that you'll be able to kind of visually see that in the previous slide.
Yeah, you can flip back.
You go back.
So you can see at year 10, I mean, that's essentially, it's a financing, your financing window, the loan you're paying off. So the cost of your loan at that point is bigger, to put it simply, than what you're saving in your energy bill. But the longer you run this, the more that those two numbers flip.
So your dashed lines there show without the grant, the solid lines are with the grant. You'll see where the line turns, that's where you start realizing savings. That starts becoming a positive number. And then where it crosses the zero axis is your return on investment.
Did you say that, is the grant a state grant?
The grant is not determined how it's obtained.
Okay. We will find grant money and we will obtain it, okay. I just want to make sure I understand which trees I have to shake.
So that was, we presented that financial part pretty simply, but if there are other questions on that, or we could probably talk about it for
Well,
3 hours.
in this chart, you show savings, but let's say on the 226 kW unit, you show savings of 22,000 and change, but we've got expenses of 103, so really we're not saving anything. We have a negative of around 80,000 in that scenario, is that right? So it's not really, I was confused about savings in that first tier and then savings later on. And it also shows up in the line chart. We're really not saving anything until we've paid off.
Right,
Right.
so it's a net savings on your electrical bill, kind of. Do you want to talk about that a little more?
Well, with the grant there, you're saving from year 1 because your annual capital cost is less.
Okay, so with a grant, you would realize,
Savings
according to the
from year
estimates,
1. That's
estimates
why-
only.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's
You
why
would-
your
yeah.
ROI is 0 there.
Okay.
So how does nature-wise factor into this? Is that calculated into the utility cost or?
It's not, so NatureWise is a different, unique thing altogether from this.
So we're not anticipating using nature-wise?
That's up for you to decide. So NatureWise would involve negotiating on a land lease and negotiating what the purchase is that the city's required to make. So that's something sort of between you and them, because we can't negotiate NatureWise on your behalf, nor
So-
should we.
So the assumption here is that this is, again, the city owning the facility,
Correct.
having all the O&M responsibility in doing it all internally
That's correct.
versus a partnership with a third party.
Correct, in terms of ownership. I mean, you could hire someone to do the O&M piece of it. Like Chris mentioned, their company is one that does that.
Is that common?
It's relatively common to do that. However, it's this project in itself is not a common project. So, yeah.
The value of O&M depends largely on the size of the system. So if you did the smallest version here, it may be more worthwhile to approach it more like an à la carte thing. You know, hey, there's a bad inverter. It has a warranty, but you may have to pay for, you know, a truck roll for someone to can and replace it. If you do a 1.2 megawatts there, it may be worth your time to have an O&M plan where somebody comes and does preventative maintenance every year and checks things over. It really depends on your appetite for that and the size of the system.
Have you installed a system, either the lowest or the middle range here, systems of that size?
Have we?
Yes.
Oh, all types, yeah.
Okay, so the question I have, and this came up at a previous meeting, can our own electrical staff perform some of these basic
Yep.
O&M duties?
Yeah, and that can be part of the handoff, part of the commissioning for the system is training the staff. We do that quite a bit, so.
So the O&M on this is relatively low compared to other infrastructure as well. I mean, I think we kind of worked together to collaborate on have an O&M number and an inverter reserve, and it's 11,000 maybe only, or what is, it's a relatively small number.
At the largest size, yeah.
So, the next step, this is, want to go one more on that one,
Yep.
Eric?
Sure.
So Eric's going to kind of guide you through this, and we'll be here for questions as well, the three of us, if you have anything, but he's
Yeah. So I think some, questions or discussion with the commission is, one is there additional information that the commission would like to see than what they've seen? This is pretty much what we're proposing to present at the public information meeting. And so, but there are also some questions for staff, like what are the priorities of the commission? Obviously, staff can pursue grants, the mayor can help pursue grants, other funding sources to do this. But is it strictly financial? Is this part of our future goals as the utility, to move forward with alternative energies for the benefit of the general population, so.
And there's a footprint issue here as well.
Yep, absolutely,
And
that's correct.
We've had some input from the previous meeting that would relate specifically to the tree line along the street there. So I'm not sure at this next meeting whether you present all three alternatives and let the discussion ensue, or do we decide on what our priorities are and present that? I'm not sure how we proceed.
Well, we're agendized for just a presentation, so we don't really decide anything right this second, but it's a good conversation. Mr. Robinson.
Just following up on that, when you do the presentation, I think the neighbors are going to have the expectations of how will this affect me? What's in it for me at the end of the day? If we can translate that into the economics of what does that mean to their utility bill and what does it mean to their neighborhood? And what is the decision-making process we will follow? Who is involved in that? Is it just this commission? Is it the city council through planning and others? And what are the approximate timelines associated with that decision-making process so they can have an understanding of when and where they need to be involved in the process. So if we can look at that, obviously, we haven't made the decision to move ahead. But if we did, what would that process look like so we can give them a little bit better guidance on, again, when and where and how?
I think some of to have the next public information meeting, the results of both of the PIMs coming to the December 7th commission for, further discussion on this, any additional information that you would need. I also, we've had some discussions at staff level about, project like this, obviously, if we're looking for grant money, other funding sources to do it other than in-house with the utility, that, there would be probably city council approval for that. I mean, they would need to do that, but I would think that the recommendation would come from the commission into some form, on to the city council.
I talked to the state treasurer who was involved in a solar project up in Washburn. They funded it, and that looks like, I don't know if that works for us, but it's something that we can keep on our radar. I think the other options we should probably keep an open mind to are ARPA funding and possibly infrastructure bill funding. Not to get too excited about that yet.
I'm not clear, and John's question, I would have the same question. Are we committed to private ownership or to city ownership of this project? Or are we still open to the other option?
I mean, we're still open to looking at other options. Staff is, if the commission is. I mean, any way that might be a benefit to the users. So far, like with third-party ownership and sell back power to us, what we've looked at is staff hasn't paid out. We didn't specifically look at this project alone, but we looked at other solar projects in the city potentially for purchasing power back, from a third party, and it didn't pencil out. Even when the private party was getting tax credits, and then they'd sell us the array back at, let's say, year 6 or year 8 or whatever it is after they've received all their tax credits for the array.
So I don't have my notes in front of me. I see that Robinson is looking at his, but I know that we made action a few months ago saying we want to move forward with this project, assuming we owned it and ran it. However, at the next meeting, we also said, but we're still open to the possibility that maybe we have an opportunity to partner with WPS.
It would seem to me that if we're having this meeting as scheduled on the 17th of November, that question is going to come up. And if we don't have a firm answer, seems like it puts us on the defensive.
On whether we're going to own and maintain?
Yeah, because it translates, I think it translates to facility size. I think third-party ownership is going to want to maximize the use of that land. And that's going to involve removing the 80% of the trees that was talked about in an earlier meeting. And that's going to have an impact on the neighbors, and that's going to affect the opinion of the neighbors expressed at that meeting. So I think it's an important point. I'm not in a position to make that decision, but it seems like we ought to have a firm plan going forward with some options. But I don't know that we should go to that meeting not knowing whether this is going to be a city-owned facility or a third-party-owned facility.
I guess when you look at the scenarios, at least that are brought forward today, when you look at the ROIs and, to put in a large array like that, the buyback from WPS just, isn't there. It doesn't necessarily make it a benefit, to the users, because the buyback of the power at this point just isn't there. It's not a great revenue stream. So it would make sense, at least in my opinion, that we would more focus the size of the array on what the operation of the plant and the usage of the plant, not necessarily trying to sell back to WPS. And so based on that, I would agree with you, Jim. I think any third party would want to maximize that site, but I don't necessarily think that would be the best interest of the utility or the users.
Mr. Jean?
Unless staff needs further direction, we have some other folks here today too, so I think if we can conclude this, it would be in our best interest, especially for their behalf.
Can I just add a couple more things? So we gave you sort of the low end of the small array, the big array, and one in the middle. I mean, there's an infinite number of sizes that this array could be, and that'll get further developed when there's a better understanding of your priorities. Like perhaps if you think you can obtain $600,000 in grant and you guys have an affinity for a $1.3 million project, we can back that in and look at it in a little more detail. So we've done a number of iterations, but it's not to say that these are the three projects, because obviously I think, if the city's gonna own this array, the full build-out project is larger than would be acceptable from a public perspective and the city being a good neighbor. So I think, Mr. Forrest, your point is well made, that if we go in front of the public and say, here are your options, I think we have to be very careful in saying, options are still being weighed. There are many options available, and we're looking for feedback from the public before any decisions are made. But we, as a design team, can't go much further than we are now without some feedback from the city and the commission on what your priorities are.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Just one final comment. My own personal feeling as a member of this commission, when I look back on when we started this discussion, my understanding was that we were looking for a solar facility that would either power the facility or offset a great deal of the power used at that facility. And in my mind, we didn't go beyond that. And it would be the first solar facility of this type in the city. So I remain committed to where I was a year ago on this issue, that we should go with a facility that will power, with an array that will power our facility, and do that as best we can. And that would be something in a smaller space range. That's how I feel.
Thank you. Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I think we are moving on. Next up, we have a presentation on the inflow and infiltration study results. Looks like we have some folks here.
What's that?
On the worst spouse possible. Okay.
Good.
Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. We're here today, we're with Strand Associates. I was here about a year ago to present a project that we did last year, the 2020 flow metering, sanitary sewer flow metering project. And today, we're here to discuss the follow-up activities from that, which involved some further II discussion. Eric, you can go to the next slide, please. And the goal of this was to identify sanitary sewer deficiencies, some specific ones, and pinpoint infiltration and inflow or I&I sources. Thanks. Next slide.
Oh, you're moving. I'm not moving. Okay.
All right, so, yeah, my name is Ryan Yentz, and I'm here with Jake Collins. I was the project manager. Jake was the project engineer, and he was out there in the field doing some work with myself and one other field technician. A reminder just on infiltration, inflow, or II, that consists of clear water that enters the sanitary sewer system and is conveyed to and treated at the wastewater plant. II comes from several different sources within the collection system. A few of the common ones are shown in pictures on this slide. We've got vented covers and open pick holes where rainwater would be flowing through those into the system. They can come through joints, steps, and service connections in public or private manholes. Or it can come through the joints and service connections in the sanitary sewers, both public and private laterals. Excellent, yeah. Just a recap on the 2020 flow meter results that identified basins contributing the most I&I. This figure was presented at the presentation last year that we did. And this shows each of the different shapes are tributary basins where a sanitary sewer flow meter was installed at the downstream end. And the red basins were the basins that had the most amount of I&I, which were the reason why they were included in the 2021 study. And in this study, we did assessments of each of the manholes, and we performed some sanitary sewer smoke testing in the service area as well. And Jake's going to talk about the manhole assessments first.
Could you go to the next slide?
All right.
So we conducted the manhole assessments in order to provide kind of an overall condition assessment of the public infrastructure. And we developed a Microsoft Access database to record all of our observations from the field. For each of the manholes that we assessed, we had 5 different forms, 3 of which are shown on the screen here. The other 2 were more of a general information slide and a pipe information one, so they weren't too meaningful. The form on the left is a identified components form. You kind of work your way from the top of the manhole down to the bottom and record the materials, dimensions, and some minor defects of each of the components. The form in the middle identifies all of the defects in the manhole. We record the location, the type of defect, and the associated II, as well as the proposed rehabilitation method. Additionally, we assign a structural condition rating from 1 to 5, with 1 being excellent and 5 being very poor, as well as a I&I condition rating with the same 1 to 5 scale. We also combine those for a overall condition rating of 1 to 10. On the right, we have our photo log, which we took for each of the manholes we assessed. We did an area photo, an up-close photo inside the manhole, as well as some close-ups of the individual defects. So moving on to the next slide. The overall manhole ratings indicated that the manholes in the Northeast 4 basin were in worse condition than the manholes in the Northwest 3 basin. Looking at the table on the top, the Northeast 4 manholes had an average rating of 5.1, slightly worse than average, and the manholes in the Northwest 3 basin had an average of 4.2, slightly better than average. We also used industry standards for each of the type of defects to assign kind of an II quantification for these defects. And from the defects that we identified, we estimate that between 0.6 MGD to 0.17 or 1.7 MGD of I&I come into the collection system through these 2 basins. Next to it shows the flow metering average from our 2020 study, which falls right in the middle of that range. And on the right, we also included a quick snippet from the Northeast 4 basin, which shows just an area that's pretty rough in shape. The red manholes are in very poor condition. The yellow and orange are kind of intermediate or average, and the green are excellent. So you can see this is an area that should be prioritized for near-term rehabilitation. Moving on to the next slide. This slide kind of shows some photos that shows that defects in the manholes can lead to future roadway defects. In the top left, you can see some pretty severe cracking in the precast concrete chimney. And what can happen is that the subgrade beneath the road begins to fall in through these defects, which can lead to cracking and some surface depression of the roadway, as you can see in the top right photo. Again, in the bottom right is the same type of defect, just in a brick manhole. It should also be noted that the Northeast 4 basin was in a lot worse condition, and that is mostly due in part to the older construction, which was typically brick manhole. Additionally, in the bottom left, we saw a lot of shims being used to raise the manhole elevation. Now, this is typically done during roadway projects, and this can lead to future defects, so we recommend taking all those out and using adjusting chimney liners. And the next slide shows some more photos, pretty similar to last page. The top 2 photos show some pretty bad brick manholes, and which can lead to roadway defects shown in the bottom right. Again, in the bottom left is another one of those shims being used. And I'll hand it back to Ryan to talk about the manhole rehab program.
Yeah, so one of the ways you can address manhole defects that we noted in the manhole assessment phase is the start of an annual or however often you guys would want to, manhole rehabilitation program. That would add another angle that you would attack II in the system. You guys currently do a decent amount of sanitary sewer CIPP lining, cured in place pipe lining, which is a good way to address I&I in the sewers. My understanding is that the city's manhole repair program has been exclusively involved with the roadway projects and occasionally some spot repair type things with city staff. So this slide was put in to give a little bit of a benchmark analysis of a similar sized community, the city of Fond du Lac, which we did a kind of a comprehensive manhole rehab program for them over the course of 2010 to 2016. They rehabbed about 800 manholes, which is about 20% of their system over that time frame, with construction costs, total construction costs of about $2 million. That averaged about $2,600 a manhole for rehabilitation. In our experience, that's a little bit less than what it would be to fully replace a manhole. And then a tip that you might notice if you look at that table in detail is that the earlier years, the average cost per manhole was actually a little bit higher or significantly higher than the later portions of the years. And that is due to the more severe manholes being prioritized in the earlier parts of their program, which might involve a little bit more extensive rehab than some of the better condition ones. We also noted that the Fond du Lac, they had design and construction engineering costs of approximately $45,000 for each phase for each of those years, kind of regardless of what size their program was in that time frame. And then lastly, the figure on the bottom there was a result of a sanitary sewer model that we had done for another community in the city of Moline in Illinois. And that just shows the typical II curve with some potential reductions in II, the blue line up top being where they were at now. And then that you can see how that curve kind of shrinks if they had 25% or 50% II removal. Moving on to the smoke testing effort. This documented 96 defects in the study area. Similar to that manhole assessment phase, we have a Microsoft Access database that we had filled out some forms for each of the defects that were noted. The form shown on the slide is an example from a private property defect where they had a defective cleanout. The 96 defects noted in the study, 74 of them were manhole defects, 12 of them were piping defects, and 10 of them were private property defects. One of our recommendations in the report was to notify the property owners where a private property defect was noted, asking them to repair it. Smoke testing on Sherman Street, that confirmed sanitary access hatches in the storm sewers should be addressed. This was one of the main focal points of both years of studies, where the city has a couple instances where they have a previously combined sewer, which was storm and sanitary, that was later separated by means of putting a kind of a pipe in the pipe concept, where there's a concrete encased sanitary sewer pipe located inside a larger storm sewer pipe. Last year, the city had contracted with an outside contractor to enter the First Street storm sewer and look at the hatches, the sanitary sewer access hatches in that sewer, and they noted defects in there. And then as part of this year's smoke testing, we looked at a similar sewer on Sherman Street. The Sherman Street sewer has about 5 access hatches between, it's like 10th Avenue and 1st Avenue. And we observed smoke from the access hatches on both 4th Avenue and 6th Avenue intersections. The other intersections it was not definitive if those intersections were specifically defective, but once smoke was able to enter the storm sewer, it kind of dissipates into the entire system. But we were confident that 4th and 6th Avenue intersections had specific defects. that should be addressed. The next slide, the First Street sewer area also showed cross connections between storm and sanitary sewers. This area was actually outside of the study area, but some city staff had an inkling that this was also a problem area for them and asked us to, perform the smoke test on this sewer as well. And smoke was observed exiting from the storm sewers throughout the area, and that's shown on the slide up there with the map location and smoke coming out of a catch basin. The last section of our report that prioritized recommendations to provide solutions to address these defects noted throughout the study. The highest priority, you're gonna get the most bang for your buck, is gonna be to televise and address the areas where these cross connections with the sanitary and storm sewer were identified. Those include the access hatches on First Street and Sherman Street, as well as that outside First Street area that we just talked about. The second would be to implement an annual manhole rehabilitation program to start piecing away at some of those bad manholes within the city. We conducted manhole assessments and smoke testing in about 5% of the system this year. It might be, we also include a recommendation to continue on with some assessments and or smoke testing in some of the next higher priority areas. Those would be the yellow ones shown in that figure. Maybe, picking one or two that might be noticeably slightly worse than others in the medium area. As Jake had talked about, those shims, so eliminate the use of wooden shims in lieu of the adjusting rings. Notifying property owners where private defects were noted. And another thing you guys could do from a manhole side of things is to just spot check these other basins for brick manholes. The brick manholes are gonna be the ones that are in the, generally in worse condition than the precast. So, that's all, I think that's all we've got. Open to any questions you guys might have.
It looks like someone has a question. I don't know if that's. Oh, all right. Well, but Mr. Robinson has a question.
Question more of Eric. So what happens with this report in the context of the capital budget and others, and how do we address this?
Yeah, I think we're to come up with some plans and some estimates on where our priority projects are based on what Ryan has put together. We have those combined sanitary and storm sewers. So we have to kind of find an approach on how we can seal those up and, what those costs are so we can get a capital project put together, to start there. They talked about the manholes as well, redoing some of those and then we'll have to establish what we think we can afford on an annual basis, and kind of prioritize which areas based on their report. I would say that, their inspection reports for the manholes and how they went through those, our staff was with them on how they completed those throughout the process, so we really appreciated that. So our staff did get a really good understanding how to fill those out, so when they go out from this point forward to review manholes in different areas of the city, that they'll be using that form in consistency. So, yeah.
I think the two higher areas that you've focused on, Sherman Street and the one down on River Drive and that parking lot, I'd like us to address that similar to how we addressed the First Street project, and then see if we can see impact or reduction at the wastewater treatment plant. And the more I think about it, I think those hatches, and yours seem to that being the conclusion, those hatches are at the cross streets. I was kind of thinking they might be more frequent than that, but I don't know that we know that.
They are at most of the cross streets on Sherman Street. They do skip a few as well. It's not at every one. I don't know if it's probably slightly more than every other one, but maybe 60% of the cross streets.
Well, it'd be nice for us to go down there and look at those, and they should be, if they're at the manholes and they're vertical if we have to go into confined space, it's at least it's a vertical, not a horizontal movement.
Correct. They are all visible from the storm manhole structure vertically. Correct.
Eric, and Dave, I'd ask, do we currently have a manhole repair replacement process? Or are we just ignoring that for cost reasons at the present time?
Yeah, we don't have anything formal.
As a program, as I stated, pretty much when we've rebuilt streets, then maybe we've addressed them. But we haven't aggressively, I mean, there's been some that have had issues, but we haven't aggressively had a program to deal with the ones that are identifying.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Forrest? Oh, okay.
Good job, concise report.
You just look quizzical, maybe.
Thanks.
No, I thought it was a concise report, I appreciate that.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Next item, discussion and possible action on the contract for treatment of raw sewage with Schofield. I don't know if you want to,
Yeah, so every it's a 5-year contract with Schofield to take their wastewater, and we treat it. So this is the renewal of the contract moving forward.
I'll move to approve.
okay, we have a motion to approve of the contract. Do I have a second? A second by Herbst. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Just a clarification, I assume we're just going to update the numbers in there, the years, because the version that we have is the current agreement?
That is
So
correct.
it's status quo on all accounts?
Yes, yeah, there hasn't been any changes to it. Yep.
Okay, anything else? All right, all of those in favor of approving the contract for treatment of raw sewage with Schofield can signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Last item on our agenda, item 10, is discussion and possible action on a change order for the Industrial Park Lift Station construction and force main cleaning project.
Yeah, so
Play musical chairs quickly.
So we have a change order on this project. So this project has been lingering for close to over 2 years, mainly because of getting right-of-way clearances and easements from the railroad, through the railroad. And so along with that, for the cleaning of that force main, have come along with some additional costs. And because of the delay in the project. And so we've reset dates for the cleaning to be done by April, at the end of April of 2022. And then also in the change order are the additional costs from the contractor because of the delay.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
I have a motion
Change
by
order.
Jean. Do I have a second? I have a second by Robinson. Any questions or comments? Okay, all of those in favor of approving the change order for the Industrial Park Lift Station construction and force main cleaning project can signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Our next meeting is December 7th, 2021 at 1:30. I would entertain a motion to adjourn by, before we do that.
Will we need to post the public informational meeting as a meeting of the commission if we have a quorum there?
I will do that. And also for the council. Thanks, John. Yep.
One other question, we had talked about having some kind of a preview of this public meeting before we actually go ahead with it. Are we not going to do that, or?
I think this was the presentation that was
All right.
presented today.
Okay.
There might be some tweaks to it, but that's in general
Okay.
what's going to be presented by Clark Dietz. I haven't seen a presentation from Renew yet, so.
Okay. One other question regarding that meeting. Are we soliciting questions in advance, or are we just opening it, are we telling folks who are invited to the meeting that there will be a Q&A period?
It's on the agenda, but also in the notices that we're sending out, there is a written way, through emails, and they can also contact us directly, if they have comments or questions on the project. And we basically store those as well, you know, and we'll present those to the commission. Any emails we get.
Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion by Herbst. Do I have a second? Second by Robinson. All those in favor can signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. We are adjourned.